All right. Morning again, everyone. We just heard from a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation and keynote panel. Now, what we'd like to do is introduce a very important topic in this main keynote presentation for the day. This keynote will be about the importance of vulnerability in leadership. We'll be hearing from Joan Alicia Cole, Head of HR APAC at Nielsen IQ. So first, let's touch on a bit about what inspired today's session. Here at Intellect, we know that discussions on mental health and HR benefits don't happen in isolation. And this needs a buy-in from business leaders translating benefits to culture. It's for this reason we'll hear a lot about the topic of leadership today, starting, of course, with this keynote, and after the break, more sessions about cultivating a healthy workplace culture and tips to set the right notes on being an empathetic business and people leader. Our speaker today, of course, will be Joan Alicia Cole, Head of HR APAC at Nielsen IQ. Joan is an experienced and well-respected business leader with great passion for talent and organizational development. Harnessing her 2 decades of experience leading the commercial business at Nielsen IQ, she aims to provide a differentiated edge in the human capital space. So glad to have you with us here, Joan, and passing the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Frank, for the introduction. Now, if you just go to the first slide that I have there, a deep, dark hole. I felt all alone in that dark hole. Now, I didn't know what to do alone in that hole. How do I get out of that hole? Who could help me get out? And when I could actually get out of that hole? This is probably, I would say, probably my best way to articulate my experience when I underwent mental depression in my late 20s. Now, if we move to the next slide, this was one of my many depressive writings, and this particular one was in 2001. Now, the emotions, the guilt, the loss, the turmoil was so suffocating that I wasn't able to comprehend them, right? I wasn't able to understand them. I didn't know what I was going through, why I was going through, how, when, what, all the questions that I have, right? I didn't know myself. And there was only one thing in my mind then that could really end all the pain and sufferings. Now, it was also this very night, on 2nd July 2001, that I almost took the plunge down from the top of a block of flats. So when Intellect reached out for me to speak at this event, I did not hesitate at all. I believe that by being here to share my personal story, I'm doing my part to really influence people and the society about the seriousness and the complexity of mental health. And also with urgency, right? Especially with COVID pandemic, with the new workplace, unlike movement towards fighting diabetes or fighting smoking, gambling, where sheer mind power could actually help the individual achieve his or her desired destination or goal. In my opinion, mental illness is probably one where, in my thoughts, the society, the system needs to work disproportionately harder to push the boundaries harder than the individual concern so that we could move the needle towards progressive recovery. So today, I bring myself forward in a very humble, in a vulnerable way to share my personal mental health journey from an authentic and first-hand manner. Next slide, please. So the agenda I have today, I would like to share from an employee perspective who has had mental illness, what stopped me from sharing my mental challenges with my manager in HR. I would also like to share as a business leader, leading large teams, right, on what we could do to really cultivate a healthy workplace culture. And last but not least, from the perspective of employee as the business leader and recent role in HR, what could be the watch-outs and practical tips to lead with vulnerable leadership? So that's the agenda that I've set for today. Next slide, please. Now, when I suffered from mental depression in my late 20s, I didn't step forward to share with anyone at work. I didn't share with my colleagues. I didn't share with my teams. Definitely not my boss, not HR, right? Now, I was a solid performer, a high achiever with great career trajectory, always with a smile on my face, always with energy and positivity at work. So no one had the slightest suspicion that I was actually struggling mentally. So what stopped me from stepping forward to share my mental health challenges? A few things. If you look at the next slide, I was worried about being judged and felt embarrassed around its impact on my reputation at work, right? Especially decades ago, if you think about 20 years ago, people associated mental illness with Woodbridge Hospital and a restrained jacket. That was the understanding then, unfortunately, right? I also feared that I would lose opportunities for career progression. With so many negative connotations surrounding mental illness, it's so easy to use stereotype to justify discrimination. And in a growth-driven multinational company that I was in, right, surrounded by leaders who always use words like, "You are awesome, you can do it, nothing is impossible," I didn't want to be perceived as a female Asian who is emotional, weak, and not capable. I also didn't want to be given a special treatment just because others are worried of my mental state. I don't want to be given a special treatment. I was alone in that deep dark hole, and I didn't expect anyone around me to understand, so why waste my efforts to explain? And honestly, I felt that talking about mental illness was a taboo, right? Nobody seems to feel comfortable talking about such things. So why share? So these were genuinely the roadblocks which I perceived 2 decades ago, right? And I sincerely believe we are more ready now as a society and as workplaces to destigmatize mental health issues. But I believe that many of these reasons are still valid even till today, that's stopping employees to step forward to share their challenges. So it took me a few years to finally seek help, right? I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and I received proper treatment. Now, 3 things pulled me out of that deep dark hole: medication, praying, and developing a coping mechanism to prevent a relapse. So, if you ask me, am I fully recovered? Well, we know that mental health is a journey, right? It is not a destination. So I can say that I know what I need to do now to prevent myself from dropping into the deep dark hole. Next slide, please. As I became a senior business leader in my 30s, leading large teams across Singapore and across Malaysia, I really wanted to cultivate a workplace that is healthy, that is open, that is inclusive. Now, while I want employees to step forward to share, to fail, to challenge, I need to also create a trusting, right? A safe space for them to do so. So one of the ways to do it is to lean forward as a leader with vulnerability. Next slide, please. Now, being vulnerable means to show yourself to others completely. To show yourself, to reveal yourself others completely without holding back for fear of rejection or judgment. Now, it allows people to be their true, authentic self in all aspects of life. Just like what I'm doing today. I'm showing myself to you without fear of being judged or rejected. To truly experience vulnerability, you need to embrace your fears and trust in others. Being vulnerable is to surrender control and personal power. It is about letting someone get close enough to you to potentially hurt you or letting go of reservations. It is about sharing a truth you are not proud of or not fluffing a situation to make yourself feel better, right? Or it can be also sharing something embarrassing or that could potentially change how others see you. This is what vulnerable leadership is about. So, how do we go about practicing vulnerable leadership? Next slide, please. Now, here's my own tested approach to vulnerable leadership, especially being in both shoes of an employee with mental challenges before, as well as a leader who is encouraging employees to trust, to share, and to confide. The 3 O's that I have is about open up your mind, open up yourself, and open up the dialogue. So I'm going to go through these 3 O's in a minute. First and foremost, open up your mind. Next slide, please. Now, while it is important, right, vulnerability is also fundamentally, I would say, one of the most difficult states for us to put ourselves in. I'm not sure if you agree, because it runs counter to our instincts, right? While everything in our DNA screams, protect yourself from harm. Just like when we see a sharp corner at a table or you see a flying arrow, you will naturally dodge, right? As a natural instinct. Now, to be vulnerable is to do the exact opposite of that. The exact opposite of that. It is to move aside our shields, right? Remove your shields and say, here it is. This is the place that you can pierce me. It is no wonder so many of us actually struggle to commit this act of courage, vulnerability, especially for new or senior leaders. For new or senior leaders, they want to be seen as having all the answers, right? I have all the answers. So vulnerability is still seen by many as a sign of weakness, unfortunately. So important correction. Vulnerability is a courage to be valued, not a weakness to be hidden. Vulnerability is a courage to be valued, not a weakness to be hidden. It is a prerequisite for leaders in today's workplace, especially this, many words have been used, right? Hybrid workplace, reimagined workplace, future workplace, post-pandemic. Like any other hard thing, vulnerability can actually be practiced. All right, open up your mind and ask yourself this question. Do you have any conscious or unconscious biases that may prevent you from embracing vulnerability? So one way to start is getting comfortable with the feelings and phrases that you see on this slide. I'm wrong. I made a mistake. I need your help. You're better than me at that. I don't have the answer. I'm sorry. I'm not perfect. Only when you feel comfortable with these feelings can we actually move on to the next phase, which is to open up yourself to others. So vulnerability really requires trust between managers and associates to share and confide in each other. Being vulnerable is an essential element of connection, right? And building trust. So the more layers of defense that you peel away, the more parts you expose, the deeper the level of trust you can have with others. There's a real overwhelming sense that you have to be a superhuman as a leader, right? When I was a new leader, I had that conception as well. I need to have all the answers. I need to be superhuman as a leader because people look up to me as such. Historically, as a leader, you've always had to be very strong and infallible to provide that kind of pillar of support that people look up to. And that actually does create really unrealistic expectations down the line. So here we are asking you to be authentic, to be human, right? Convert those feelings of vulnerability into words. So during your conversations with your employees, it's not just about feeling those words and phrases that I showed you earlier on. It is okay to use words like I'm sorry, I don't know, I make a mistake, or I need your help when you converse with your employees. Vulnerable leadership doesn't mean you have to wear your heart on your sleeve, right? It doesn't mean that you have to tell your life story in details. No. It actually means about understanding where your strengths and weaknesses lie and being honest about them. Being honest about them with yourself and with your team. Leaders must model what it means to be open about mental health so that we can help our employees feel safe. So being honest and open about your own struggles and challenges. These will actually help to erase the stigma and invite others to feel comfortable, right? And invite others to share their experiences without fear of shame or judgment. Now, in addition, having leaders state that they are prioritizing their own health, right? By setting boundaries. For example, I'm logging off for the day. I'm going to take a day off to rest. Actually allow others to feel confident to do the same. So by being vulnerable as a senior leader, you then give permission for others to be vulnerable as well. It makes it safe, right? It helps to build trust and shows that vulnerability is a strength to be valued rather than a weakness to be hidden. Now, the next O, the third O, is about opening up the dialogue. Next slide, please. So hold regular, meaningful one-on-one conversations with your teams. Have a dialogue as a whole person, not as an employee. How often do you go into a weekly check-ins or weekly one-on-one with your team members and say, how's the project coming along, right? What's the sales for this week? How's the client feeling, etc.? How about having a conversation, treating your employee like a whole person? It shouldn't be all about work. Ask them about their weekend. Ask them about their family. It'll be amazing how much you will encourage your employee to open up and how much you get to know about your employee in person. Now, open up the dialogue, not simply asking, are you okay? I know the title of today's session is, are you okay? But instead of asking, are you okay? Go deeper by asking, what's been on your mind recently? What type of support you need right now? Now, these types of questions can help open up the dialogue and provide a safe place for your employees to be vulnerable and share. Acknowledge their struggles, right? Acknowledge their struggles is the first step to creating a psychological safety for our employees. Don't undermine their struggles. And please don't say, look on the bright side. You'll be fine tomorrow. No. To show compassion and to create psychological safety is to really acknowledge the struggles and distress, not to lessen it. Active listening, right? Focus on not just what is being said. Listen to the values, listen to the emotions behind what is being said as well, and acknowledging them. Be comfortable with silence. We are often tempted to fill silence with words. When the person is crying, we often rush to get tissue, right? We often do that. Well, it's okay to rush for the tissue, but please don't rush to offer comments or advice or solutions. Be mindful of your body language and expressions, as this could turn out to be cues for the person to either open up or withdraw further, right? Are you sitting with an open or closed posture? Are you raising your eyebrows? Are you smiling when the employee is crying? Yeah, so all these we just need to be very mindful of. And last but not least, assess your role. When the employee starts to confide and share, is your role just to listen? Is your role to give more support, find other support, or more listening? It all depends on each conversation. So these 3 O's of open up your mind, open up yourself, open up the dialogue, hopefully will provide a structure to help you decode vulnerability and to practice it. Now, finally, on my very last slide, I want to leave you with 10 practical tips to set the right notes on being an empathetic and vulnerable leader. And these 10 tips will be based on my own mental health journey and learnings as a business and HR leader. Next slide, please. So these 10 tips. First, don't ask, are you okay? Which, again, I know is the title of this session, but instead ask, what's been on your mind lately? How are you feeling? Give them the permission to describe and not to force fit whether I need to be okay or not okay. I shouldn't have to make a choice whether I'm okay or not okay. When one is not that comfortable speaking up, I'm okay would tend to be the default answer. And that's not what you want. Number 2, when someone shares his or her mental health struggles or challenges with you, don't say, I'm sorry to hear that, because that is pity. Say thank you for sharing with me. Thank you for taking the courage to share with me, because it will actually encourage the person to share more. Number 3, when someone shares his or her own mental health struggles or challenges, please don't say I understand or I know, because you don't. When someone goes through a depression or, let's say, chemotherapy, you will understand only when you have personally gone through it. Worse, don't say, look at the bright side, you will get over it soon. For me personally, that is an ultimate killer. That is a killer that will make one withdraw even further. Number 4, don't think you can always spot someone with mental health challenges. The most depressed person can look the happiest, most confident, most successful person. Mental health or mental illness is not one that is worn on the sleeve all the time. So don't assume. 5th, don't be a superhuman. Be human. Be a human leader. Be vulnerable. Number 6, don't let your positivity and optimism be seen as lack of empathy. As leaders, while we want to motivate our teams and inspire our teams that yes, we can do it, nothing is impossible, we can be awesome, that is absolutely fine. But be conscious to exercise empathy as you show positivity. Exercise empathy as you show positivity. Acknowledge distress, struggles, and challenges. 7, don't assume senior leaders know how to handle this just because they are experienced leaders. In fact, they may be the most difficult ones to train and educate, as they are the ones who need to take the biggest step towards embracing vulnerability. 8. When I was leading the Singapore and Malaysia business at Nielsen IQ, I volunteered to share my story in leadership talks with the intention to cultivate an open, healthy workplace where people will feel comfortable sharing. The very first time I shared my story in a large setting, my teams reacted to it indifferently. There were no reactions, no questions, no comments, no acknowledgement. That's because they were probably shocked, or basically they didn't know how to react. That didn't stop me, and that shouldn't stop you. Till today, I still share my personal story where appropriate, as it takes time for people to feel comfortable, right, listening to such stories. Number 9, know your mental health and boundaries. You're not a trained counselor or psychologist. Don't expect yourself to keep listening to the emotional struggles of others and solve the problem. So be wary of your own mental health and capacity. Last but not least, performance management and mental health. Performance managing employees with mental health issues can be complicated. The same applies to role redundancy, right? So do not assume how a mental health issue might affect an employee's performance. And do not assume that the mental health problem might not be genuine. So treat each case with care and with absolute due diligence. So my closing remark for you, a study conducted by NTUC Learning Hub in 2021 revealed
Hi, Joan. So sorry, I think there was a technical error. Will you be able to unmute your audio?
Yep. Where did they stop?
You were sharing us a study from NTUC Learning Hub.
Okay, so let me repeat that. So a study conducted by NTUC Learning Hub in 2021 revealed that 3 in 5 employees in Singapore have been experiencing less than favorable mental wellness at work. So coming up from COVID pandemic, the hybrid workplace, or what MOS stated, work-life harmony, is pushing for greater human centricity more than ever before. Empathy, vulnerability is now becoming the prerequisite of leaders today. So with that, I close the session. Frank, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joan. And firstly, would like to take the time to recognize and thank you for taking the courage to share this with us and appreciate your leadership being vulnerable and authentic. At the same time, you've also shared incredibly practical tips with the audience today, which I'm sure they find very useful. And we will take one last question as we close this session. So there's a very good question, I think, addressed from Wesley about how do we discern when to protect ourselves from harm and when to be vulnerable and open.
Well, for me is if you start always with 100% trust, you just go full-heartedly, right, to reveal yourself. Because I think when we go in with 50% trust or 0% trust, that's where we'll always have reservations. If you don't try it, you wouldn't know it. If you always hesitate, you will never be able to reveal your true self and to build trust. And that is the real practical example I went for. I just went for 100% reveal of who I am, and the truth didn't hurt, right? If there are people who wanted to judge, so be it. But to be honest, I think I'm helping more people. I'm making a bigger difference, and I'm encouraging more people to step forward to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Joan. I would very much agree with that as well. And this session is, of course, an example of that. So apologies to the rest. Unfortunately, I know there's quite a lot of questions that came in. We will record them and get back through the post-event memo. That said, I do want to quickly recognize that there are a number of questions coming in about ways to refer back to this session or previous sessions. There may be some material that you are interested to recap, such as the tips shared by Joan today and so forth. So what will happen is that post this event, all live viewers will have access to a post-event resource. And of course, this is only as and when the presenter is comfortable with sharing the slides or material with the audience. So rest assured, we'll be sharing that with you next week. And again, thank you, Joan, for being here with us today. Very, of course, authentic and vulnerable sharing. We'll be back after the lunch break at 12:30 p.m. with a continuum leadership panel with the CEO and co-founder of Carousel, as well as the managing director of McDonald's Singapore. So I'll see you then. Thank you, everyone.